The image I have of the Titanic is always associated with luxury and grandeur. But was it really like that for everyone? While first-class passengers bathed in porcelain tubs and expensive perfumes, third-class passengers barely had access to a decent bath, and more. The sanitary conditions on board hid a reality that few people know about. Want to keep discovering more about the impressive, and sometimes disgusting, hygiene conditions aboard the Titanic? Keep watching, because I've done deep research and the revelations are just beginning. The Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a promise. A promise of luxury, safety, and an unparalleled experience at sea. When it left Southampton in 1912, it represented the peak of engineering and sophistication. But there was one detail that few questioned. How did a transatlantic ship of such magnitude handle something as basic and essential as hygiene? 1.1. The myth of the Titanic as a luxurious ship for everyone. The advertising of the time painted the Titanic as a true floating palace, ornate salons, exquisite restaurants, and a crew trained to serve passengers as if they were royalty. But the truth was that keeping a clean and pleasant environment on a ship with more than 2,200 people was a monumental task. From the moment passengers boarded, they were welcomed by spotless corridors and environments scented with fine colognes. The ship carried an absurd amount of towels, more than 40,000, because hygiene was a constant priority. The Titanic's laundries worked non-stop to ensure that towels and sheets were always impeccable. In just the first week of the voyage, over 15,000 pieces were washed daily. Traveling across the ocean was a fascinating experience, but it also carried invisible dangers, diseases. Without the sanitary technologies we have today, ships needed to maintain strict cleanliness standards to avoid outbreaks of infections. Imagine a closed environment, with thousands of people from different parts of the world sharing spaces. Strict cleaning routines were necessary. Hallways were disinfected daily, bathrooms underwent frequent inspections, and there were strict personal hygiene rules for everyone on board. After all, an outbreak of cholera or typhoid fever could turn the dream trip into a nightmare. Many passengers were required to undergo medical inspections before boarding to ensure they weren't carrying contagious diseases. Some people were even barred from boarding for failing to meet the required sanitary standards. On the Titanic, luxury went beyond sparkling chandeliers and sophisticated food. The true exclusivity was in the intimate comfort, private bathrooms, hot water, barbershop services, and even massage rooms. But of course, it all came at a price, a high one. The most expensive suite on the Titanic cost the equivalent of $50,000 in today's money, offering a level of sophistication that rivaled the best hotels in Europe. Guests in these cabins enjoyed luxuries fit for royalty, personal servants, embroidered towels, and hygiene products imported from France. For the wealthy, the 5-day journey would be an experience straight out of a fairy tale, with no worries other than what dish to choose for dinner. Some luxury suites even had porcelain sinks with gold-plated faucets, a detail that reinforced the exclusivity of the experience on board. And so, as the Titanic cut through the icy waters of the Atlantic, its passengers enjoyed the comfort and refinement of the ship. But was this luxury available to everyone on board? If you think all Titanic passengers experienced the same level of comfort and cleanliness, think again. The ship, just like society at the time, was divided into distinct classes, and this was reflected in every aspect of the journey, including hygiene. For some, the experience was fit for royalty. For others, it was a daily struggle to maintain dignity. For first-class passengers, the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a 5-star floating resort. Suites were equipped with private bathrooms, featuring running hot water, porcelain sinks, and even soaking tubs. Not to mention the imported soaps from France, fluffy towels changed daily, and barbershop and hairdressing services on demand. Every detail reflected sophistication and care. Personal servants were always ready to fulfill any request, whether preparing a bath or simply warming a towel. The wealthiest passengers even received personalized bathrobes with their initials, embroidered in gold thread. But let's be honest, the real luxury wasn't just privacy. It was the certainty that every small discomfort of the transatlantic journey would be resolved with the snap of a finger. In second class, things were still quite satisfactory, although with some restrictions. Here, passengers had shared bathrooms, but with a certain level of privacy. Each cabin had a small sink with running water, allowing at least a quick face wash before bed. The problem? There were strict schedules for using the showers, which operated in shifts to ensure everyone had a chance to freshen up. If you missed your turn, well, you had to wait until the next day. Still, for many second-class passengers, being aboard the Titanic was a unique experience. Cleanliness was maintained at an acceptable level, and the environment was well organized, with laundries working tirelessly to keep sheets and towels in order. Even without much luxury, second class, passengers had access to good quality soaps and hygiene products, something unthinkable on many ships of the time. And now we come to third class. The reality here was completely different and far less glamorous. Imagine more than 1,000 passengers sharing 2 bathtubs. Yes, just 2. Hygiene conditions were so limited that bathing was rare and, for many, unthinkable throughout the entire voyage. Basic hygiene routines were reduced to damp cloths and, in some cases, the traditional chamber pots, which had to be emptied into the sea by the passengers themselves. Cabins were simple, small, and lacked privacy, housing several people in cramped bunk beds. The hallways were always crowded, and the smell of food, sweat, and machine oil mixed in the air. The towels provided to third-class passengers were reused from previous voyages, often without proper washing. And if someone wanted to use the bathtubs, they had to face a long line, and the water had usually already been used by others. Yes, the concept of shared water was very real there. The difference between the classes was glaring, and despite all its splendor, the Titanic carried a harsh reality for those who couldn't afford luxury. But in the end, the question remains: did the difference in hygiene affect the fate of these passengers during the sinking? When it comes to traveling by ship, many imagine glamour, breathtaking views, and an unforgettable experience. But few stop to think about the less glamorous side of the trip: access to the bathroom. On the Titanic, this was not just a necessity, but a matter of status. First-class bathrooms on the Titanic weren't just visually luxurious, but also technologically advanced for the time. Automatic flushing? Yes. A plumbing system that prevented odors from coming back? Also, everything was meticulously planned so the millionaires wouldn't have to worry about mundane issues. Each luxury cabin was equipped with a silent and innovative hydraulic system that used carefully calculated water pressure to conserve resources while ensuring a pleasant experience for passengers. Towels were changed twice a day, and hygiene products were imported from the best European suppliers. The water used in first-class bathrooms went through a filtration system that removed impurities, ensuring that even the bathwater was impeccable. Now, if that level of detail impresses you, wait until you hear how the crew dealt with hygiene for the other classes. If you think third-class passengers had it tough, imagine the crew. The Titanic's sailors and workers, who worked exhausting hours to keep the ship spotless, had to settle for an even more restricted bathroom setup. Many crew members slept in areas near the boiler rooms, where the heat was unbearable and hygiene was a constant need. However, the reality was very different. Showers for the crew were cold, limited to a few minutes a day, and the toilets, well, let's just say they were far from any acceptable standard of cleanliness. The smell of coal and oil mixed with sweat permeated the crew's clothes, and uniform washes were rare, resulting in an unpleasant environment in the ship's lower decks. Have you ever wondered how the sewage systems worked on a gigantic ship like the Titanic? Well, back then, technology was far from efficient. The waste disposal system used retention tanks that, from time to time, were emptied into the sea. Common practice, but far from hygienic. To make matters worse, when the ship faced rough seas, the simplest toilets in third class often overflowed, creating very unpleasant situations for the passengers. Meanwhile, in first class, the water pressure was stronger, preventing such mishaps. 2 completely different worlds within the same ship. During storms, it was common for toilets to clog, forcing the crew to carry out emergency maintenance at sea, causing chaos in the lower corridors. Imagine this scenario. You sell everything you have to buy a ticket on the Titanic, full of hope to start a new life in America. But before you even set foot on the ship, there's one last hurdle, the dreaded medical inspection. And no, it wasn't just a simple, "Good morning, you may pass." It was a true test of physical and emotional endurance. For third-class passengers, the journey began long before stepping on the ship. At embarkation ports like Southampton and Queenstown, doctors scrutinized every passenger in search of signs of contagious diseases such as tuberculosis, trachoma, and even lice. No privacy at all. The inspections took place in large halls where passengers were lined up like cattle, examined quickly and often brutally. Men and women were forced to remove parts of their clothing so doctors could check everything, from their hygiene conditions to any physical deformities that might make them a burden upon arriving in America. One of the main concerns was trachoma, a highly contagious eye infection that could lead to blindness. Any suspicion of this condition was enough to be immediately barred from boarding. Now, if the inspection on land was already complicated, imagine how things were on the Titanic itself. Even after boarding, the crew conducted periodic inspections among third-class passengers. Health officers walked through the hallways looking for signs of fever or respiratory diseases, while assigned nurses distributed cheap soap, rough and of low quality, to encourage passengers to maintain the minimum necessary hygiene. But, let me be honest, with poor bathroom facilities and overcrowded cabins, staying clean was almost an impossible mission. The long journeys without proper ventilation and the sharing of tight bunks made odors and infections spread rapidly. Some passengers tried to cheat the inspections by using strong perfumes to mask the smell of not bathing. And if third-class passengers thought they had already been through the worst, their arrival in the United States would present one final challenge. For third-class passengers, the real nightmare wasn't even on the ship. The biggest fear was what awaited them if they reached America, the infamous Ellis Island inspection. Ellis Island was the gateway to the United States and, at the same time, a true bureaucratic and sanitary minefield. Thousands of immigrants were evaluated daily, and any detected health issue meant an abrupt end to their American dream. Aboard the Titanic, many third-class passengers were well aware of this. Scary stories circulated through the corridors. Some spoke of people who were sent back without a penny in their pocket after selling everything they had to board. Others talked about families being separated because someone was deemed unfit to enter the country. To give you an idea, about 2% of immigrants arriving at Ellis Island were rejected for medical or legal reasons and sent back to Europe in total despair. But, ironically, Titanic passengers never got to face this feared inspection. The shipwreck ended the dream before it could even be tested. For some, the tragedy in the Atlantic represented the early end of an inevitable rejection. For others, the loss was even more bitter. A lifetime of sacrifices sunk along with the ship. Thus, Ellis Island remained an unknown for those who never had the chance to set foot on American soil. However, the harsh reality is that even if they had arrived, many would still have faced the most ruthless evaluation of their lives. On the Titanic, smoking wasn't just a habit, it was a ritual of prestige. And for first-class passengers, there was a special place reserved for it, a luxurious smoking room, a true exclusive club for the wealthiest and most powerful. This space was decorated with exquisite furniture, mahogany-paneled walls, and elegant lighting fixtures where gentlemen could light up their Cuban cigars and discuss the big issues of the time. And, of course, all accompanied by a fine glass of aged cognac. It was a place of status, where smoking was not just a pleasure, but a demonstration of power. The amount of smoke in the air was only rivaled by the number of conversations about business and fortunes. The Titanic carried no less than 8,000 cigars, carefully stored to ensure that high society men never ran out of their aromatic companions. But this exclusivity had very clear rules. Women were not allowed in. After all, at that time, smoking in public was considered inappropriate for them. That's right, while lighting a cigar was a status symbol for men, for women, the situation was quite different. Smoking in public? Oh, not a chance. The habit was seen as something far too bold for most women, something that could stain a lady's reputation. Of course, some more modern and daring women defied conventions and enjoyed cigarettes in their private cabins. But unlike men, who made smoking a social activity, they had to hide this little vice from curious and judgmental eyes. Meanwhile, in second and third class, the relationship with smoking was even more restricted. Besides the high cost, few had access to tobacco. For many, the smell of first-class cigars was the only experience they would ever have with tobacco. The irony. Even though women were discouraged from smoking, they were frequently exposed to the smoke that infiltrated the ship's hallways and salons. If first-class passengers enjoyed fine cigars, the rest of the ship suffered the consequences. The Titanic may have been luxurious, but its ventilation system was still limited, and cigar and cigarette smoke spread throughout the ship, creating a heavy and suffocating atmosphere, especially in enclosed spaces. It wasn't uncommon for the smell of tobacco to invade corridors, rooms, and even dining areas. Crew members often complained about the constant haze of smoke that lingered in the air, something difficult to escape, no matter what class they were in. For third-class passengers, who traveled in much simpler accommodations with poor ventilation, the situation was even worse. Many didn't even have access to fresh air areas, being forced to endure the accumulated smoke in common areas. Ventilation was so inefficient that in some areas, the smell of tobacco lingered for days, clinging to curtains, clothes, and even the ship's furniture. My friends, when the Titanic hit the iceberg, the last thing on passengers' minds was hygiene. In a matter of minutes, luxury and grandeur gave way to absolute chaos. Fancy bathrooms, embroidered towels, and porcelain sinks meant nothing in the face of the freezing water flooding the hallways. In the first-class cabins, stunned passengers tried to understand what was happening, while many still clung to the hope that it was just a minor setback. Some even attempted to freshen up with a hot bath before realizing the gravity of the situation. In third class, however, the reality was entirely different. With poor communication and locked in the lower decks, entire families faced a desperate struggle against the rising flood. The dirty water that quickly filled the compartments brought not only the terror of drowning, but also all sorts of dirt and debris accumulated within the ship's lower levels. And the toilets? Well, let's just say that in the midst of panic, no one had time for organized lines or social etiquette. Necessity overcame civility, and many passengers found themselves in embarrassing situations even aboard the lifeboats. There are survivor accounts mentioning that, during the evacuation, some first-class women even complained that they didn't have time to get ready before abandoning the ship. The Titanic's evacuation exposed a harsh reality. The ship was prepared for luxurious parties, but not for a mass evacuation. With thousands of passengers crowded in narrow hallways and congested staircases, finding a functional bathroom became practically impossible. On the lifeboats, the problem only worsened. Many were so overcrowded that there was barely room to move, let alone attend to personal hygiene. The biting cold and constant fear pushed basic needs to the background, until they could no longer be ignored. Passengers reported that, during the hours adrift in the Atlantic, the situation on the boats became unbearable. The lack of drinking water worsened the discomfort, and the only option was to endure, hoping that rescue would arrive before things got any worse. It is estimated that some people spent more than 20 hours on the lifeboats, facing not only the extreme cold but also the urgent need to take care of basic bodily functions without any structure for it. Oh, my friends, we might think of the Titanic as the ultimate symbol of luxury and sophistication, but, as you can see, for those traveling in third class, the story was quite different. While the wealthiest passengers enjoyed long baths in porcelain tubs, the less fortunate had to make do with minimal and often unsanitary facilities. The narrow, stuffy third-class hallways barely accommodated so many people packed together. The hygiene conditions, which were already poor from the start, became even worse as the days went by. Sheets were not changed frequently, the food was subpar, and the shared bathrooms became almost unusable by the end of the voyage. It's sad to think that, for many, that trip represented the hope of a new life, yet their journey was marked by challenges far beyond the sinking itself. Despite all the lack of comfort, many third-class immigrants thought the Titanic was still an improvement compared to their living conditions back home. The Titanic sold the image of an unforgettable experience, but in reality, luxury was reserved for only a few. While the rich enjoyed 10-course dinners in dazzling dining rooms, most passengers endured simple meals in cramped spaces. This disparity was reflected in every aspect of the journey. The crew knew that their priority was always to serve first-class passengers with maximum attention and care, while those in the lower classes were left in the background. After all, it was the millionaires who ensured the ship's reputation and profitability. And you know what's even more interesting? Even in first class, not everything was perfect. The wealthiest passengers had their own worries and demands, and not all were satisfied with the service provided. Luxury doesn't necessarily mean happiness, right? If the Titanic left anything behind besides an unforgettable tragedy, it was drastic changes in passenger ship hygiene standards. The disaster highlighted the need for better sanitary conditions and more accessible basic services for all classes. After the sinking, new maritime regulations were implemented, requiring more bathrooms per passenger, more efficient ventilation systems, and stricter oversight of ship cleanliness and maintenance. The tragedy served as a wake-up call for future transatlantic liners to be designed with greater attention to the well-being of all passengers, not just those who could afford luxurious suites. Today, modern cruise ships offer private bathrooms for all passengers, something unimaginable in the Titanic's era. Now that you know all this, tell me, would you have traveled in third class knowing these conditions? Leave your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel, like, and share it for more videos like this. Oh, and before you go, there's another video popping up on your screen that, if you like this story, you'll definitely love. Click it and keep exploring the mysteries of the sea. A big hug, and see you in the next sea story.